Well, every few years in Nigeria, we revisit the same conversation: power shortages, diesel dependence, rising costs. But there's another angle we don't often talk about enough: the energy choices Nigerian businesses are making today, which are fundamentally reshaping the structure of our economy quietly and at scale. What's happening is not just the shift from diesel to solar. For instance, it's a shift from asset ownership to service models, to subscription models, to data-driven platforms in the clean energy sector, to credit-led energy decisions. And as businesses begin to redesign their power and electrification strategy, a new clean tech ecosystem is emerging, one that blends finance, tech, credit scoring, infrastructure, and AI into something far more interesting than simply solar power. Well, today we're not asking why is electricity unreliable. We're asking, what does Nigeria's emerging energy market tell us about the future of business, productivity, and innovation? And joining me now are two founders building at that intersection. First, Mohammed is CEO of Rana Energy, which is delivering energy as a service, enabling institutions like banks and SMEs to run on solar and storage without owning the infrastructure, all wrapped into one finance and AI-enabled model. And we have Chidalu Onyenso, CEO of Earthbound, which is tackling the financing bottleneck by using data and credit analytics to match SMEs with the right solar solutions and the right funding strategy. Well, I mean, you've heard me talk about these two great founders here. So let's try and unpack some of these solutions we're seeing. Great to have you both in the studio today. So we've seen many Nigerians sort of migrating from generators to alternative funding models. But sometimes they don't seem to be consciously just thinking about clean energy. It's all about efficiency, sustainability, security of supply. So what do you think is the real driver of this shift? And I'll start with Abraham.
No, thank you so much for having me, Volker. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I think fundamentally, it's about control. So when you look at it, Nigeria is the generator capital of Africa. And the reason why we're the generator capital of Africa is because businesses realized that they couldn't rely on the grid. And so as a result of that, they needed a way to have control. So control over when the power is on, when the power is off, and which is what the generators come in to do today. For decades, we've had subsidies which made the inefficiencies of the diesel market permissible, right? But with the recent shifts over the last few years, that has fundamentally changed. The economics has essentially collapsed. And as a result of that, businesses now really want to know how can they have energy that they can rely on. And so the real driver behind this transition is control. And that's why people are moving away from diesel to alternatives such as grid, solar or gas.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when I think about that control, if I was a business owner, is really thinking not just control over the costs, but even just seeing how much I'm using. And I know you work in the context where you're able to see what SMEs are doing. Are you noticing any patterns in how businesses are using or consuming electricity?
Absolutely. So within our model, businesses are essentially reliant on energy, and it's as important to their business as inventory is, right? So we focus on SMEs and businesses where you have this growing cost of energy, you have this unreliability, you have this lack of control that they are trying to overcome. So when they're looking for energy solutions, maybe they're looking for an energy solution specifically for an appliance that they can't run on grid because of all the volatility.
Right.
Maybe they're looking for a system to take off half their load or just their daytime loads where they'll continue to use grid or generator at night. So they're looking for unique solutions that the rest of the world does not look for. And so you have a lot of businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of technology popping up in Nigeria to specifically solve for these individualized use cases. This is a market where we've already been off grid for decades,
yes,
right? So
course.
it's not just it's not just about like, oh, off grid this, off grid. It's about now we have all of these variable costs of energy. How do I create the lowest cost of energy for me, my business, and my needs?
Yeah, and of course that will help with planning and forecasting. So when we look at energy as a service, I think for the majority of Nigerians, it's still a relatively new concept. That is essentially, you don't own any of the infrastructure. You essentially just pay for, you buy the service. Is this something that can be mass market, or is it still a premium niche? Abraham?
That's a good question. It's really a niche. I think we're seeing this shift to energy as a service happening real time. And let's unpack what energy as a service actually means. It is the customers don't want to own the energy infrastructure. They don't
So, for example, they don't want to own a generator.
They don't want to own a generator.
Okay.
They don't want to worry about putting petrol in it. They don't want to worry about managing the solar system, you know. And so instead, they would just like a subscription where they just pay monthly for it. So if you really unpack what it takes to own a solar system right now, you got to do energy audits. So you have to find people to do several energy audits. You got to understand what your inverter size is, your battery, your panels, that complexity. Then you have to now go and find installers that you trust. You ask your friend, you ask your other friend, and then even after you've installed it and you have an issue, you start chasing those installers over again. And so actually, what Energy as a Service does is it takes this all away. You subscribe to energy the same way you subscribe to data. We're actually seeing this shift happen globally. We are seeing centralized utilities try to change from being a utility to an energy as a service business. And so actually in Nigeria, we are arriving at the right time.
Okay.
To make the shift
so
happen.
It's not a market that's ahead of its time, because there was a time when people would say that about solar home systems, for instance. Okay, so this is interesting because I'd come back to you, Chidalu. Part of what you're doing is the financing and the credit side. You're essentially providing credit underwriting to SMEs. Are you seeing growing affordability? Or what is the data telling you? Are SMEs increasingly able to afford these solutions?
Yeah, definitely. So solar for our customers is a revenue generating asset, but it's oftentimes treated as a luxury that someone wants to finance, right?
Okay. So explain the revenue generating asset first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as I'm saying, if you run, let's say, a pharmacy, right? You have maybe freezers, you have centrifuges, etc., that need energy to run to complete tasks that you are then generating revenue from.
I thought maybe you meant they were selling the power, extra power generated, because the net metering side of things.
Definitely. But even today, right, just internally within your business, it's critical and crucial for your productivity, right? So instead of being just treated as a luxury item or an additional, nice to have for businesses and being underwritten as such, people are starting to take into account that by deploying this amount of energy or energy reliability, you are now increasing the gains of this business. They should be treated more as project finance rather than just as a loan or consumer finance, right? And so we're starting to see that shift, or at least that opening up of the market. Now, are all banks on board yet? No. A big no. But conversations are starting to arise. Microfinance banks and neobanks are starting to take notice of this and adapt and build more, let's say, flexible models, right? And more intuitive models that take into the new forms of data that we have, right? Whether it's digital payments, BBNs, even taking informal lending online, right? But just as well looking at energy consumption as an input to offering someone a loan. So for us, if we're looking at retailers, for instance, and I'm looking at a clothing retailer, I can see that it is important for your lights to be on, but they can be charged, your POS can be charged. But if I'm looking at a grocery store where you have food in the freezers and you have spoilage to worry about, you are much more creditworthy than a retailer, than like a clothing retailer, because if that energy asset shuts off, that is a huge loss to your business, right? So you won't take that risk. It's not just a a capacity to pay; it's a willingness.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often have conversations with every day is this comparison between diesel generators and solar, and if you talk to somebody who's not very exposed to the alternative energy, and they're like, oh, it's too expensive. And so there's this very linear comparison of costs, diesel and solar. And for somebody who's worked in the solar space, I know that it's so much more than that. It's about downtime, productivity. So how do we actually really measure energy cost in Nigeria? Abraham, maybe we'll start with you and I'll come to you.
That's a brilliant question. It actually builds on a lot of things that Chidalu just said. So there's two parts. There's the direct cost of energy, which is obviously the cost of your grid or the cost of the diesel, right? And what you actually find is that for Band-Aid customers, if you blend the diesel cost with the grid cost, you actually get to about 350 naira to 400 naira. Yeah. But that's just 30% of the story. The other 70% are these indirects. It's the inefficiencies. It's the fact that as a restaurant owner, you have food in your fridge and then you go back and you come the next morning and that food has gone bad. It's the fact that you are losing sales because you're shortening your operational hours. So those are the actual 70% are the actual inefficiencies. And so what we also see in addition to that is by the time you factor in the real cost of energy, you go from 300 naira 30,000 naira per kilowatt hour. And actually, it's quite interesting because people say energy systems are expensive. They're not. What is expensive is the inefficiencies in the system.
Yeah.
Today, Nigerians spend $10 billion on power, which is between grid and unreliable and very expensive diesel. But the actual economic loss is
so much bigger.
$30 billion. And so what we're trying to do in Rana is, look, when we speak to our investors, is we tell them, look, the economy is there. The economics make sense. All we're trying to do is to channel those $10 billion of costs, those $30 billion of economic losses into a long-term infrastructure that can actually generate revenue and save productivity for the customers.
This is a random, interesting question for both of you. If we were to have a reliable grid today, would this business models completely collapse? Or is that just such an elementary question? I'm asking on behalf of Nigerians, right?
I'll let Chidalu start and I can probably give a view as well.
So, I have two views on it, to be honest.
Okay.
What is reliability, right?
Okay.
So some people, I mean, even if you look across the world, right, large industries will still have off-grid energy solutions, right, either as backup or even as primary source. For Nigeria to have reliable energy, it's not just about the distribution companies, it's not just about generation, right? It's a whole system that needs to come into play. And when we look at what we are doing, there is still a credit element and a reliability component that needs to come back to the individual SME, right? So to speak more concretely, there's a lot of belief that we could get to a level where maybe residential use cases are powered by solar, right? Because they're quite low level. But when you see huge industrial needs, or even see, right, even smaller industrial manufacturers, right? Their needs will very unlikely be met by even just, steady energy from the grid if there's not enough energy.
They would need gas to power maybe, or some other type of
So right now, Nigeria provides, 20% of the country's, generates 20% of the country's total energy demand. That doesn't even go down to what actually gets distributed.
Yeah.
So when we talk about reliability, okay, maybe we get to generation. How do we get to distribution?
Okay.
24 hours at whatever capacity is needed.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm thinking is hybrid, right? A mix. Abraham.
No, I mean, you got to spot on. I think it's a hybrid of a mix. I think a functioning grid doesn't take away affordability need of the customers. It doesn't take away the need for good service for the customers. So I'll give you an example. We actually have a product specifically for Band A customers, which is called Safe to Earn. And what we tell the customers is that, look, the savings you make by switching to our solar system over a long period of time will be translated in you owning the system. And so the more savings you make, the faster you can actually own the system for us. So like our flagship customer, the National Defense College in Abuja, is actually in a Band A area. And last week, they came to me and said, look, Abraham, can you expand our system because we have new buildings or because we want more savings? So it's a military institution, it's a Band A zone, and they still are trying to switch to solar. I think even with it, a perfect grid, our model not only survives, it thrives.
Yeah. So let's switch from sort of the cost to sort of the tech layer, which I'm really intrigued by. Your technology that you work with allows you to analyze sort of creditworthiness, repayment behavior, demand consumption patterns. Is there a particular insight that you see that may not be so obvious to those of us on the outside of using these systems?
Yeah. When we look at SMEs, I think there's a lot of fear that they aren't bankable, right? But your typical SME is doing an ROI analysis that's oftentimes even deeper than some of our corporates.
Yeah.
Right? Because
that's
for
ROI
them,
is return on investment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apologies. So,
no, it's okay.
So they're really looking. They've moved, right? And originally, when we started, it was all about how much is solar, right? How much it's going to cost me. But now it's transitioned to how much is this going to save me, right? And how long is it going to take me to get to those cost savings? So we have businesses coming in that are bankable, right? And they can qualify for financing for up to 4 years. But they're looking at it and they're looking at how they're spending cash, how they're spending on diesel. And they're understanding that, okay, well, if I can reallocate those savings and pay this off even earlier, I'll get even more savings from the system, and then savings on, interest or just over time, right? So you're seeing people make very interesting and kind of elegant financing decisions, right, that I think banks and more traditional lenders would not expect of SMEs. So they're armed with more data, they're armed with more understanding of how solar works and how it's going to impact their current operations.
Indeed, and I think that's interesting because it probably introduces some overall discipline into how they run the business anyway, beyond energy consumption and use. So I want to ask you, Abraham, around the technology. How is artificial intelligence been deployed in what you do, and what role is it helping to change the game, essentially?
No, thank you. I think people say AI is a buzzword. The reality is AI has transformed energy from a slow-moving infrastructure that takes years and years to deploy to actually like a fast technology product, and that's why Rana exists. So I'll give you an example. The core of Rana is an AI tool called Vision, VSN, and what Vision allows us to do is three things. First of all, we can design a solar system for a manufacturing plant. From weeks to minutes. Most times when I go for a pitch, I've already designed the system for the customers. I'm not telling them, hey, we're going to come and do an energy audit. I'm telling you, this is exactly the tariff you're going to have. This is the savings you're going to have over the long period of time. That's one thing it does for us. Second thing is we have operational assets because we control the assets. We remotely, right? And so we have operational assets across the country, and we can see it in real time. We can see if there's any issues, and we can proactively solve for issues. I'll give a very example. So one of our clients, we have underground cables, and then we noticed that the power was reducing, and we thought it was a rainy season. What we found was rats. Rats had eaten half of our cables. But before they even came to us, we already noticed from the data, and our system had told us, hey, look, based on the average that you'd expect at August of the year, you're underperforming. And so our team were able to then proactively go and solve that issue. And so that's on one end, right? The efficiencies it gets. What is really exciting is when you look at the intersection of energy and compute, which is like data centers. We're trying to leverage our experience in deploying large-scale solar assets to actually see if we can deploy green data centers. Right? And I think why this is super interesting is because then we're moving from just saying Rana is doing energy as a service to Rana is deploying compute as a service as well, which can be exported, by the way, because of like AI training and everything else. So this shifts, Rana into a completely new territory. I tell my employees that, look, AI technology are enablers, but what you really need to unlock scale is stable policies and a strong business case.
And you end on the note, the final question I was going to ask both of you, and maybe I'll start with the policy side, just very, very briefly, Abraham, and then I'll come to you to end the show. What is the one thing you'd want to see change now in the policy environment that would really not just catalyze the work you do, but the industry as a whole? Very briefly.
So I'll tell you one real good thing, and I think you actually mentioned at the beginning, net metering. What net metering allows you to do is, I've left my house right now, I have solar, so my solar is operational. It can actually generate power to sell back to the grid. When Pakistan did this, Pakistan went from 1 gigawatt in 2017 to 30 gigawatts in 2026, or like by next year. So really, like, that was driven by net metering. I think Nigeria can actually go from 1 gigawatt to 10 gigawatts if we deploy net metering. And of course,
net metering needs a sort of policy and regulatory framework. Okay, I'll come to you, Chidalu. 2030, SDs, Sustainable Development Goals. What do you think the impact of what you're going to do is going to have on development in terms of jobs, other aspects that may not even be obvious to the eye?
I think when we think about energy, it's going to be the biggest macroeconomic stimulus boost in Nigeria, right? If we can reach these SDG goals of just energy, reliability, and accessibility. And when we try and get to 2030, it's going to be, the core thing is going to be around economic and business stability, right? Businesses and their lifetime and their life cycle, right? Because businesses today that maybe shut down after a year, after 2 years, due to the rising energy costs, that's going to be gone, right?
Okay.
And that's the goal, at least, for that to be gone. So if you can achieve that, those businesses that you're now just trying to bring from bottom of the pyramid to the middle is going to be stable. So then you can bring those up, right? So my true belief is that it's going to impact businesses very positively. It's going to basically bring about longevity of small businesses. So you're not seeing these 1-2 year cycles.
Sure.
You're seeing 5, 10 year, 20, 50 year businesses.
Sustainability, really.
Literally.
And are you a believer in net metering as one of the
100%,
Right.
right? I think when we look at, right, so for us, the main driver that we provide our businesses is this business case, right? And we're saying, all right, if you can exchange diesel and petrol for solar, great. But every day, right, you are generating a little extra. If you could sell that back to your neighbors, if you could sell that back into the grid.
And that's extra revenue.
That's extra revenue.
Yeah.
You reach your business case
Absolutely.
faster. Banks will want to invest more in this class. It speeds up everything, accelerates everything.
Yeah, and we didn't get a chance to talk about carbon credits and all of that, but maybe you'll come back from a part 2. Thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating conversation. Always great to be talking to young, very progressive founders trying to make their mark in the sector. Thank you so much for joining the show, both of you. So we've been talking to Abraham Mohammed and Chidalu Onyenso about the clean tech revolution in Nigeria and Africa. Well, that's all we have time for on Business Week. I'm Rolake Akinkunwe-Filani. Let's continue the conversation on X. Do have a lovely rest of the weekend.